Dr. Leonie Schulte is from the University College London, and the title of her presentation in Linguistic in Security, How Germany's Integration Policies Delay Newcomer Socioeconomic Mobility.
Thank you, Cécile. Thank you, Salikoko, for organizing this very exciting workshop. I'm very pleased to be here. Since I'm an anthropologist, I'll be reading from a text I wrote. So I'll start. So in contributing to our discussions at this workshop on the interrelationships between economy, migration, and language, this paper considers the ways in which language learning requirements, or rather the credentialization of linguistic knowledge in Germany, how it impacts newcomers' socioeconomic mobility. And so in the theme of this workshop, I'm thinking about a certain aspect of economy broadly construed, namely an individual or group's economic outcomes and well-being, and the ways in which these may change or be impacted over time, specifically in this case by policy. My paper is based on over 5 years of ethnographic research in Berlin, Germany, including participant observation in 4 different state-funded so-called language and integration courses for migrants and refugees. Now, after Antoine's paper, I feel it necessary to specify why I'm using the categories I'm using. So throughout this paper, will refer to my interlocutors as newcomers. I use this term because I find it the least politically charged. It's not a legalistic term, but it does capture one shared reality, which is that they have generally been in Germany for 5 years or less. Right? I do sometimes use the terms migrant and refugee to make clear that these spaces are inhabited not just by the forcibly displaced or those who are in need of protection, but people who have migrated to Germany for many different reasons. So I do make that distinction just to clarify. So what was I going to say? The aim of the study, and I'm participating currently in one of these spaces, is to follow its participants, not necessarily in their language learning process, but in their everyday lives, to understand whether these state-mandated spaces actually help them sort of settle, find work, and really what language has to do with integration. So those are sort of the core questions I unpack. Now, before I unpack my research and core arguments further, I'd like to begin with a brief vignette from my current fieldwork in Berlin. I sit with Clara in a cafe in central Berlin. It's an April morning in 2023. We had just been to the job center, the local employment office, for an appointment with her Beraterin, or her consultant. She had been summoned to this meeting by mail with little explanation or detail. This appointment turned out to be a routine check-in to assess her progress in the German course and to discuss the next steps for her professional recognition procedure in Germany. Clara is one of 23 participants in a state-funded so-called Deutsch für den Beruf, or Career German course at level B2, or Intermediate to Advanced German, on the Central European Framework of Reference for Languages. So the aim of this course is essentially to prepare newcomers for work life in Germany, for their careers. The majority of course participants are recently displaced Ukrainian women, like Clara, who are required to attend state-run German language courses before they are formally permitted to work in Germany. Most of them have been attending these courses since shortly after they physically arrived in Germany a year earlier. Clara is a gynecologist and one of only 3 leading endometriosis specialists in Ukraine. She was 46 when she fled Ukraine in 2022, and at the time she had just become a chief practitioner in a private clinic. As we sit together, Clara tells me that she is desperate to resume her career, but that like most newcomers to Germany, or especially in the medical profession, she will first have to complete German courses, including specialized German courses for medical professionals, so Fachsprache, and pass a so-called Fachkenntnisseprüfung, or specialist knowledge exam, and then, only then, undergo a rigorous professional recognition procedure in which her degrees and qualifications and work experience will be measured against the German equivalent. Should her qualification, should it be recognized by the German state, only then can she formally begin to apply for positions. This process, even if it goes quickly, so the entire process we just saw, if it goes quickly, it'll likely take at least 2 to 3 years. If her qualifications are not fully recognized, this could limit the kind of medicine she can practice or even the kind of work she can do in Germany. So in the coffee shop, I ask her about the German course. Does she feel like this is helping her? And she responds, I look at this as a kind of job. It's a job I need to do right now in order to get the kind of quality profession that I want. Because I know that in order to work, I have to learn German. I know that the kind of work I want relies on me having very strong German skills. I ask her how she feels about having to go through this very lengthy process of language learning and professional recognition. And she says, sometimes I feel useless. I was a very successful doctor in Ukraine, but here I am not recognized as a doctor. I am 0 or minus. I am an expert, and sometimes it is confusing to think that my experience is not being used here. Clara tells me that it's a shock to go from a recognized professional to someone who receives social welfare and is reduced to a language learner. To have to start from scratch, despite the skills, knowledge, and experience she brings with her. She tells me she wishes the process could go faster, that she feels stuck and uncertain about what the future will bring, that everything has suddenly become langsam, or slow. Descriptions of time slowed, restarting, feelings of stuckness and uncertainty have been omnipresent in my interactions with my interlocutors since my research began in 2017. These experiences, as I've come to find, are part of what I call the compounding temporal consequences of Germany's language integration policies and practices. Just need some water. Reading makes you thirsty. Look at my icons again. I designed them. So in what follows, I will outline Germany's integration policies briefly before exploring their temporal effects in more detail, mainly through findings of my 2017 to 2019 ethnographic study. Specifically, I will focus on the experiences of Anissa and Halim, a young Syrian couple, as they navigated the integration system over a series of 6 years. So in response to over 1.3 million displaced persons seeking asylum in Europe since 2014, roundabout, many countries have tightened their language learning requirements as part of stricter immigration control and as an effort to more quickly incorporate newcomers socially and economically. At least that's what they're saying. Having granted asylum to nearly 1 million refugees between 2014 and 2018, Germany has been at the forefront of such policy reforms, including an expansion of its already existing language and integration programs. And passing these programs is a prerequisite for most newcomers to be able to move on and pursue formal work and long-term legal security in Germany. So this also affects citizenship and permanent residency. German policy discourse often frames the acquisition of standard German as a, quote, key step in newcomers' socioeconomic inclusion and mobility, often portraying linguistic integration as the quickest and most effective means of allowing newcomers to, quote, live independently and without the help of a third party. These are some ad campaigns by the Berlin government encouraging newcomers to learn German. So the idea behind this is that since you necessarily will need intermediate to advanced German skills for citizenship, permanent residency, employment, higher education, and so on, if the government funds and coordinates nationwide language courses for newcomers shortly after they arrive, this will not only ensure a baseline proficiency, but it will speed up their access to work. So shortly upon physical arrival, migrants, so quote, voluntary migrants and forcibly displaced migrants are required to complete these Sprach- und Integrationskurse, which I will refer to as LIPs from now on. So they begin at level B1 on the CEFRL scale, and they're very, very time-intensive courses. They run for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, for an initial period of 7 months. They are run by government-accredited courses, and they're overseen by the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the BUMP. They're also funded partially through the employment offices. So during their attendance, newcomers receive welfare benefits, and their rent and living costs are also covered by the state. Now, since 2018, the BUMP also subsidizes these so-called B2 career German courses. These are slightly shorter in duration, running for about 4 months full-time, with the aim of preparing newcomers for everyday life on the labor market. So from interacting with colleagues and clients, phone and email etiquette, and of course, the importance of being punctual for work. There's a whole chapter on that in the book. So streamlining access to the labor market through language learning has been a particular focus in German policy discourse during the last year and a half, during which time close to 1 million displaced Ukrainians received asylum and permission to work in Germany. So in this time, course books have been revamped further to focus more on labor market access. So things like writing resumes and applications and preparing and conducting interviews and things like that. So very clearly, linguistic integration is framed as a tool for accelerating socioeconomic mobility. That's very clear. And indeed, many of the over 90 voluntary and involuntary migrants that I met during my ethnographic research since 2017 have regarded the language learning requirement as this major stepping stone. That is a major stepping stone in their pursuit of employment and financial independence and social belonging. So they really believed that finding work would be easy because the German government was so involved in their incorporation. And so this was true particularly of Halim and Anissa, who fled to Germany from Syria in 2016. I met Halim in the first language LIP I observed in 2017. He was one of 25 participants of the course, which ran every weekday morning from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. for 7 months. Courses were very diverse, including participants from a broad range of ages, ethnic, national, and linguistic backgrounds, education levels, socioeconomic backgrounds, and migration experiences. Now, despite this diversity, all participants would have to sit the same standardized B1 exam before they were able to move on. Shortly after meeting Halim, I quickly began visiting him and his wife and their 2 children at their home. Halim had had a successful 12-year career working in cybersecurity, a field in which he intended to pursue in Germany as soon as he had all necessary language certificates. In this case, allegedly, it's C1. And Anissa, who had been studying psychology in Damascus, wanted to re-enter university also after passing the C1 exam. And now this is a very interesting point here. Halim works in IT and cybersecurity. This is actually regarded as a non-regulated profession in Germany. So it's not like regulated professions are like lawyers and doctors and educational professionals. So technically, Halim could have begun applying for work as soon as he arrived, as soon as he had the permission to work with his temporary residency. But the job center overseeing him urged him and continued to urge him to keep taking these classes. So I just want to make that very clear, because technically that's not necessary. So like many newcomers in Berlin, Halim and Anissa saw the integration program as a kind of roadmap for them to identify the steps that they needed to take in order to anticipate the future. What are the requirements that they need to fulfill, and what would each step allow them to do next? Bryant and Knight have pointed out that the ability to identify the steps needed to achieve what is anticipated for the future creates the foundation of our ability to expect future outcomes. So we need to be able to anticipate the steps to take in order to expect something from the future. And this is particularly true for members of the integration course who not only relied on the stated outcomes of each course, but also on the predictability of the time that they would take, right? How much time do I have to invest into this? Because to the participants of the LIP, time was a very valuable commodity, one which there was never enough of. For many of the individuals I met during my time in Berlin, experiences of migration and displacement, as well as the events leading up to them, had robbed them of several years of their lives, a period that left them with a sense of urgency to make up for lost time. Anissa and Halim often described this urgency as a kind of Druck, or pressure, that they felt to pass through the language courses quickly so that they could begin studying and working, and most importantly, become legal residents in Germany, permanent residents. However, as the couple would quickly learn, rather than a straightforward route as had been advertised, the LIP was shaped by a multiplex of shifting temporal experiences, from moments of sudden deceleration and stuckness to changing routes and misdirections as they contended with the expectations and complicated guidelines of the many, many bureaucratic institutions that oversaw this integration process. For though these programs are designed to accelerate newcomer incorporation, in practice, as a result of these compounding experiences of slowing and restarting and stalling, these courses in practice significantly delay their access to work, higher education, and a sense of inclusion. What is more, because of this slowing effect on their sense of progress, newcomers to Germany face protracted experiences of futural uncertainty. So over the course of their time in Berlin, Halim and Anissa became increasingly frustrated by the pace of their language learning and the time spent in and out of these programs. Courses were grueling and time-intensive, meaning that the better part of their day was spent either sitting inside a classroom or commuting to and from it. This also meant that pressing appointments at the German Employment Office and all other personal matters had to be handled outside of classroom hours. So did appointments at the Immigration Office. So did doctor's visits. So did childcare. As he pursued avenues for professional skills training, Halim was forced to drop out of the B1 language course in 2017 and had to wait to re-enroll in the course the following year. Anissa had been taking German courses intermittently for years, but her course attendance was interrupted while she was expecting their son, Yusuf, and while the family searched for a primary school for their daughter, Sophia. In the absence of suitable childcare options, Anissa was forced to put the language courses on hold, while Halim completed the B1 course for the second time. This was a common occurrence in the LIP. Many had to drop out of courses and re-enroll at later stages, further extending their liminal positions. Failure rates at the final exam were also very high. In the 3 courses I observed, at least 50 to 60% of participants failed the final exam, and this forced them to re-enroll in the program again. In one course I observed, as many as 90% failed the exam. In practice, this means that many newcomers spend years moving in and out of language classrooms. And as employers are increasingly requiring higher and higher levels of German, most of their time in their first few years in Germany is dedicated to language learning. But it was not only the pace of the courses themselves and the time that they took up in their everyday lives, it was the uncertainty of when they would be completed and where they would lead to. Increasingly, it became clear that linguistic integration meant far more than just completing a language course. As they pursued avenues for employment and higher education, Halim and Anissa would often tell me about the repeated bureaucratic hurdles that they encountered, something that had gone wrong, a qualification Halim was missing, or a certificate he was still waiting for. "We are always waiting for something," Anissa would often say. Anissa and Halim quickly found that Germany's language requirements were deeply embedded in a broader, complex, and often opaque bureaucratic landscape that newcomers have to navigate. And all of which relies on their ability to do so in German. So they had to contend with the fact that time was often not their own, but instead was structured and overseen by what social theorists call industrial time, regulated by technologies and institutions, and which were ignorant of and inflexible to the complexities of their own lives and the goals that they had set for themselves. Pressure continued to mount as Halim and Anissa contended with industrial time. This pressure took on many forms, but the most powerful of them seemed to be what they would call Zeitdruck, or time pressure. This means several things, not least the restructuring of their daily lives to meet the timelines and requirements of the many institutions that oversaw their settlement in Germany. But Zeitdruck also meant the kind of temporal pressure that Anissa and Halim felt to actualize their future, to finally shift out of the liminal space of temporary refugee status, language learner, or someone, quote, in need of integration. A pressure to become financially independent from the state and to resume a life that for so many years had been suspended by uncertainty. For Anissa and Halim, learning German was thus part of achieving economic mobility. As Halim once said to me, we need to be independent. That means no more help. That means working full-time. I am thankful for the job center. They pay for basically everything, but I don't want that anymore. So while they are still officially unemployed, newcomers receive a broad range of financial aid from the German government. This includes, as I mentioned, a small monthly allowance, a metro card, health insurance, but also rent and utilities. So state financial aid is intended as this safety net while newcomers take the required language courses. However, as Halim reveals, financial aid comes with a great deal of interference from and dependence on the state, which has contributed to his own feelings of stuckness, immobility, and an absence of personal agency. During our conversations, Halim explained that he resolved to secure a life for himself in Berlin by learning German well and demonstrating his ability to live self-sufficiently. Ultimately, he knew that to secure his future in Germany, he would need permanent residency. In this way, for Halim and Anissa, achieving financial independence and secure employment was not only a form of progress, but it was also a means of attaining a sense of security, undisturbed and free from any possible government intervention. So by the spring of 2020, almost 4 years after arriving in Berlin, Halim had finally received all language certificates, and he completed additional vocational training, as he was advised to do by the employment office. So suddenly this sense of progress set in, and he began to apply for jobs at local tech companies. Time suddenly felt like it was accelerating, and that soon Halim and his family would achieve financial independence from the state. However, soon Halim was met with a further hurdle. He began receiving strings of rejections from potential employers. So though he, quote, ticked all the boxes, seemingly, these potential employers said, you have a 4-year gap in your resume. This gap was, of course, the result of years of language and vocational training that Halim underwent in preparation for these very job applications, right? So astonished, they once said to me, we have always been told that we have to learn German first and then we can work. Why are they telling us this now? What are we supposed to do? So it is clear that they're getting limited, misleading, and perhaps conflicting information from various institutions about what they're expected to do. And unfortunately, it took Halim another 1.5 years, so close to 6 years after arriving in Germany, to secure work. So as I have found, even for those newcomers to Germany who complete all necessary language courses, the pathway to employment and a sense of stability is often uncertain. And this is largely because the accrual of language certificates does not necessarily guarantee access to employment or higher education. And just to conclude, as reports from 2021 have shown, around 56% of recent refugees to Germany, so those who have arrived since 2014, but excluding this recent displaced community from Ukraine, are still or underemployed. And as I have found, one compounding factor contributing to these high and underemployment rates may lie in Germany's current language and integration program. Final thoughts, which significantly, as we have seen, delays the point at which newcomers can even begin applying for work, and which heavily bureaucratizes language within what Heba Gawayed has called a system of credentialization that does not easily recognize the skills that newcomers bring with them. So therefore, instead of easing newcomers' sense of independence, as these policies state they do, they may counterintuitively turn into significant sociocultural and economic barriers when put into practice. And that is what I am investigating in my current project, which I was going to tell you about, but I guess I'm out of time. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for some questions from online or from the room. Yes,
So far, nothing from online. Alfonso, your question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Leonie, I mean, I obviously know your work and love your work. I was thinking, so I think those of us working on those issues, I mean, it's very, very familiar. But in Italy, where I have worked, so there are moments, you know, of both, slowing down and then immediate acceleration. And I was thinking whether there is the acceleration also exists. You talked about it, but whether that exists also in Germany, or whether this is a very Italian specific thing, right? And then I was thinking also whether, because all these people that you were mentioning, right? The other categories, the high and low skilled, right? Would be categorized as high skilled, if you want. And I wonder whether the fact that I'm documenting moments of acceleration, right? So it's summer, there are tomatoes that need to be picked. So you know what? Forget your language class. Now you need to work. So whether you have that as well, or not at all.
Thank you. I actually did include a line about sudden acceleration, but I had been using acceleration so often that I cut it out last minute. But yes, there are moments of sudden acceleration when you're essentially stuck waiting for documents and they suddenly arrive, and that opens a door to the next thing, and you have to make very quick decisions that have very significant consequences for you and your family. So these kinds of things happen all the time. It's this sort of truncated timeline that's stopping and starting and accelerating and decelerating all the time. But one constant thing is that you're stuck in the language classroom for most of this. So there's no way out of taking these courses unless you're in Germany on a work visa or you're an EU citizen. So, and I didn't really understand your point about high and low skilled. If Mhm. 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 I haven't met anyone who does, but actually that does bring me to my current project, because this is a very good point. I've noticed in the current class that I'm in, this career course, that since these policy changes, it's very apparent that the government is preparing newcomers for very specific jobs, very specific kinds of work. And those are sort of nursing and care professions largely, and so-called Ausbildungsberufe, so trade professions that require vocational training, so like merchants and bank clerks and things like that. And very little focus is placed on regulated professions, so doctors, education professionals, lawyers. They're not included in these books, nor are those who want to go to university. There's no talk about university entry anymore in these books, and there's no more talk about self-employment or entrepreneurship. So it's very clear what kind of vocational tracks newcomers are trying to be pushed in. And you also see this from the job center, the kind of options that they're kind of giving people. And so this is actually raising a huge concern in my current research, which is still very underdeveloped, but I'm wondering, so in this class, half of them are either in regulated professions or they want to study and they're young. And so one question is, are there secure tracks for them to secure these futures? And if not, then what are the potential trade-offs that they're going to have to make in order to access the labor market at all? Yeah.
So we have a question online from Schulte. How well are teachers in these language classes prepared for teaching in the type of multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multilingual environments you describe? I'm interested in the pedagogical aspect of what goes on in these spaces and whether that contributes to the low level of success at passing the exam.
Thank you for that amazing question. While I don't focus on pedagogy myself, and I'm not an applied linguist, of course I'm sitting in these spaces and can tell you a little bit. So teachers are not self-employed. Not volunteers. Oh no. So they are employed. They're not employed by the school. They're paid by the state. So they're self-employed. So that means they're also in, sorry, English. So they're also in these very precarious positions. They're not paid very much as self-employed instructors, but many of them have an educational background. A lot of them have PhDs or they have worked as teachers elsewhere, and they are trained by the schools through funding provided by the government. And the teaching, I can't qualify the teaching, but what I can say is no, they are not prepared to do this kind of the kind of work that they need to be doing in these spaces. And of course, you can't really expect that of one individual person. You have up to 25 people from a huge range of backgrounds and learning abilities and experiences of trauma. And you are supposed to teach them these standardized course books and prepare them for a standardized exam, but there's so much more that you have to do. You're handling people with severe trauma. You're dealing with people who are desperate financially or legally or in legally precarious positions. These teachers are not trained to do that, of course, and they're absolutely not compensated to do so. But what I will say is I've seen that the majority of them so far, and I haven't been in all of the schools in Berlin, the majority of them are white. And there's quite a lot of xenophobia and racism present in these spaces.
I have a question, but before, thank you for your presentation. It was very, very interesting, and you described the situation in Germany very well, and I'm happy about that. And this is something that, if you open the eyes in Germany, you can see that. You can see what you are describing, and firms and companies know about this problem because they are searching for labor force. But they don't have this labor force. They try to hire new migrants from different other origins, but they have still in Germany these people stuck in this waiting time. So, and my question is, what do you think is under the politics of migration in terms of linguistic integration in Germany? What is behind that? We know that the mainstream sociology of migration says in Germany, we need linguistic integration in order to drive social integration. But maybe in your observation and also in some new studies, we know that it's not true. Maybe we can we propose an opposite direction? The labor integration can drive linguistic integration and then social integration, or maybe is there a third way in between? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Thank you. So to your first point, one thing I noticed doing fieldwork now, as opposed to a few years ago, is that there's an abundance of so-called job coaching companies all over Berlin. And they didn't exist when I started fieldwork a few years ago. And I think these are groups that have seen that there is this gap that needs to be filled. So they're trying to steer people away from the job centers and coaching them into the kind of non-regulated professions. I think that's something I'm looking at. What is the idea behind linguistic integration in Germany? Well, I am writing a book on that. But I'll tell you briefly my thought. It's a completely ideological exercise. So first of all, I think the idea of these courses, or this political idea, policy idea of integration, is first and foremost about governing newcomers. It's a great tool for surveillance, tracking their progress, tracking their financial status, tracking where they are in the country, right? This is a surveillance tool and a method of control. But the idea of linguistically integrating, or integrating at all, is pure ideology, because of course it's based on an image of what it means to belong to a certain community. And whoever creates that image is obviously going to determine what that looks like. And the other problem with integration is that it's a moving target. You don't at any point arrive at integration. You're never, when are you fully integrated? You never are, especially if you're a person of color, if you're not a white German. You're never going to be integrated and you're never going to belong. And I think that's what this whole idea behind integration is trying to hide. That yes, we can integrate you somehow, but you'll never belong to this community. And I think it's a tool to veil that, and is ambiguous on purpose.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I just have two quick questions. The first is, because on the one hand, it seems to me that you echo kind of traditional sort of German definition of the nation, which would be perhaps specific to Germany, but to what extent do you have some comparable information about other countries? Is it the same in other countries? I guess Germany is specific in terms of its recent history, but nevertheless, integration for language is something that you come across all over Europe. I mean, France is a big issue as well. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. And also, what type of changes could you perhaps observe? I remember I did field work in Germany, in Berlin 20 years ago, and I also followed some of these classes. There were lots of young Turks learning German, but not the same framework. So I was just wondering, is this recent, like a post-2015 Wir schaffen das development, or is this something that fits into a longer history of integration? So I was just wondering whether it's a U-turn in the German policy, or if it's something that has deep historical roots, at least now in the modern Germany.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear about your fieldwork in Berlin or in Germany. So yes, you're right. Obviously, this is not a concept that is unique to Germany. And the idea that people need to conform linguistically is nothing unique to Germany or nothing new. What I will say is that I believe that it was both the Netherlands and Germany that first introduced this idea of integration policy in the 90s or late 90s, and that it's spread to many countries in Europe. What was your second question?
I mean, the recent history has changed a lot after 2015.
Right. So, brief history: Germany refused to acknowledge that it was a country, a destination of migration, an important destination of migration, until the late 90s. And it was at that point, when it had to face the fact that it was a major destination for migration, that they had to find a way to govern this large community. And so out of fear of sort of the effects of multiculturalism and a fear that of losing control, this idea was introduced that these programs should exist. So this was only at the beginning, early 2000s, they started. But they really didn't become what they are today until, as you said, 2014, 2015. This is when the courses were revamped, the funding models were changed, the course books were changed. It was directly in response to the war on Syria.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I have one quick remark and another question, perhaps. You spoke about Clara, and Clara, she's a doctor. I think that there is also a problem with most of the immigrants who have a medical degree, and when they come to West Europe, so their degree is not recognized. I don't know if it has to be also do something with the language, because even if she were speaking good German, I wonder if she would have gone, if she would have obtained a job in the medical sector. So this is also something to be reminded of, because I have seen many people who have come to France who were surgeons for 15, 20 years, but they were not allowed to touch the tools in the operation theater. So this is the first remark. The second one is that, well, your subjects are highly qualified people over here. But perhaps it would be good also to mention to your public that there is also a huge informal economy in Germany where people are working without any German knowledge. Perhaps that exists also, isn't it? That was my quick question and remark.
Thank you so much for both of those really important points. Of course, the story of the doctor who arrives in a new country and can no longer work in their profession is not new. But what I'm finding so astonishing about Germany in 2023 is that we do have a shortage of medical professionals, and we have a lot of medical professions in the country that we could utilize. But the reason that we can't is because of these policies, that they have to learn basically mother tongue German first before they can even do an internship or assist in any way. And then they have to have all of their degrees and qualifications first translated into German, officially notarized, and then sent to this German institution, which measures it against the German equivalent. So there's no flexibility around including medical professionals from outside of the German system. So this almost seems like an intentional sort of filter system, right? And I think it's very important to point out that sort of what's going on in Germany in these specific ways, because I think it is quite different in comparison. And the second is, yes, I mentioned Clara and Halim and Anissa, who are middle class, upper middle class, are in very high skilled professions. And of course, that is not representative of the people in these spaces. Many have sort of unskilled backgrounds or have very little formal education, and many who work informally alongside these classes, because the government funding is certainly not enough for them to provide for themselves and their families. So many people work before and after class as wait staff, whatever they can find that they can do sort of under the table. I have visited many interlocutors at their work, yes. Yeah. So these informal economies are necessary because the state doesn't give you enough for you to really be self-sufficient or independent, and that's clearly part of the plan. But people find these informal strategies of kind of supplementing their income so that they can live in Germany. Thank you.
It made me think, because I think one of the outcomes of the recent changes in German policy, like attracting foreign workforce, I came across a study that showed that lots of people in many regions in the world started learning German, like going to Goethe Institute, these type of things. So I was just wondering whether you could connect this, whether you had information about how perhaps there was a kind of pre-training, pre-migration training done by the German authorities in the sending country or the origin country, even before migration. That was if it was an outcome of the new policy, so to recruit people, people start preparing before coming to Germany. This could be perhaps one way, of course not for refugees, but one way of avoiding some of the problems you mentioned.
Thank you. So that certainly exists, both through the German government, but also independently by countries of origin. There are many studies coming out of Turkey, also before these policies came into place. Schools for people who intend to migrate further to Germany. This has existed for a very long time. Yes, and that's a good point. And I think the idea is, yes, then we can circumvent all of this and fast track. But what happens is you arrive in Germany and they do a Einstufungstest. So they assess your German. And of course, this can become very subjective because you also have to do an oral assessment. And so a lot of people are assessed below what their level actually is. So there's really no way of getting around this unless you realize, oh, I can apply for jobs on the side, because most people are not in regulated professions. So technically they could get around this, but they're being told that they can't. And they also need it for citizenship and permanent residency. So it's really something that's very hard to avoid.
No, there is no question, and the time is up. I just want to convey Christine Sagnier's thank you for this very interesting presentation.